Imagine this: a candlelit chamber deep inside a crumbling monastery, with scholars shifting in meaning, waiting to be matched with the unfolding events of history. And as the pieces align, they draw us ever closer to the question at the center of this documentary. As the flickering flame dances across the page, two worlds appear side by side, strange glyphs of a lost civilization in the jungles of Central America and the unmistakable red cross of the Knights Templar. It should be impossible. The Templars were disbanded in the early 14th century in Europe. The Maya flourished across the Atlantic, separated by an ocean thousands of miles wide. According to the history books, these two cultures never met. They belong to separate stories, separate timelines, separated by what we've been taught is an unbroken wall of geography. And yet, across scattered whispers of history, there are fragments that suggest otherwise. Fragments that mainstream history has ignored or dismissed or quietly buried. There are reports of strange stone carvings hidden in the jungles of the Yucatán that depict symbols eerily similar to medieval European crosses. There are oral traditions from indigenous communities that speak of pale-skinned visitors arriving in ships long before Columbus. And there are those tantalizing old maps that show the coastlines of the Americas drawn with uncanny accuracy decades, even centuries before they were supposedly discovered. This documentary explores a forbidden question. What if, in the shadowy years after the fall of the Knights Templar, these mysterious warrior monks set sail into the unknown, crossing the Atlantic not to conquer, but to preserve, to safeguard secrets too dangerous for Europe and perhaps too powerful for any single civilization? What if their destination was the land of the Maya, an empire of astronomer priests and pyramid builders who themselves guarded cosmic knowledge so advanced that modern science still struggles to explain it? If such an encounter happened, it would change everything we think we know about history. It would mean that two of the most enigmatic cultures, separated by ocean, language, and worldview, shared a moment of contact, exchange, or perhaps alliance. A collision of mysteries, hidden just out of reach of the official narrative. This is not a simple story. It is not a neat tale tied with a ribbon of certainty. Instead, it is a labyrinth of clues, coincidences, suppressed texts, and impossible artifacts. We will journey through the rise and fall of the Templars, explore the genius and spirituality of the Maya, and follow the whispers of evidence that suggest these two civilizations might have brushed against one another in ways that history refuses to admit. As we peel back the layers, you'll notice a pattern. The closer we come to the truth, the more the records grow silent. Entire codices burned, entire archives sealed, entire ships lost at sea without explanation. Almost as if someone, or something, wants this story to remain untold. And yet, despite centuries of silence, the whispers still echo. A carving here, a map there, a story carried by generations, reshaped but never erased. Like fragments of a broken mirror, scattered across continents, waiting to be pieced together. In this opening chapter, let us plant the seed of curiosity. Let us step into that candlelit chamber, feel the chill of forbidden history, and ask the question that mainstream scholars dare not ask. Could the Templars and the Maya, two civilizations cloaked in mystery, both accused of harboring forbidden knowledge, have truly met? If the answer is yes, then our understanding of history is not merely incomplete. It has been deliberately rewritten. So lean back. Let the atmosphere of this tale surround you like mist in an ancient forest. Over the next several hours, we will navigate between fact and speculation, between the known and the forbidden, tracing the echoes of a story that should not exist, yet refuses to die. Because sometimes history is not what we're told in classrooms and textbooks. Sometimes history is what survives in whispers, waiting for those who dare to listen. This is the story of when the Templars met the Maya. Picture Europe in the 12th century, a continent scarred by wars, crusades, and the endless struggle for survival. The streets of Paris and London echoed with the cries of merchants and pilgrims, while the holy city of Jerusalem, thousands of miles away, became the heartbeat of medieval ambition. Kings, popes, and peasants alike dreamed of the Holy Land, a place they believed held the keys to salvation. It was in this turbulent era, in 1119 AD, that 9 knights gathered in Jerusalem. They were not the most powerful men of Europe, nor the wealthiest, but they had a vision. They vowed to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, a noble mission on the surface. But from the very beginning, there was something different about these knights, something secretive. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a name soon shortened to the Knights Templar. Their headquarters was no ordinary barracks. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem granted them residence on the Temple Mount, directly atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple, the holiest site of the Jews, and some whispered, the hidden storehouse of ancient relics. For 9 years, these knights lived there, digging, searching, and vanishing from the public eye. And when they emerged, everything had changed. They were no longer just poor knights. They were favored by the Pope, granted extraordinary privileges, and soon became the most powerful military and financial order in Christendom. But what had they found beneath the Temple Mount? That question haunts history. Some say they discovered relics, perhaps the Ark of the Covenant, the treasures of Solomon, or fragments of the true cross. Others suggest they uncovered manuscripts, scrolls of secret knowledge that traced back to Babylon, Egypt, or even beyond. Whatever it was, it transformed them from humble knights into guardians of mysteries. The Templars quickly rose to become not only warriors of the Crusades, but also bankers, architects, and secret keepers. They invented financial systems that allowed pilgrims to deposit money in Europe and withdraw it in the Holy Land, centuries before modern banking. Their red cross became a symbol of both fear and reverence across battlefields. Yet alongside their rise, whispers grew louder. The Templars were accused of studying forbidden sciences, dabbling in alchemy, and communicating with hidden masters. Their rituals were cloaked in secrecy. Even other knights, soldiers, and priests were excluded. Only those within the order knew what truly occurred behind closed doors. By the 13th century, they were untouchable. They owned castles, vast estates, and fleets of ships. They advised kings, crowned monarchs, and carried secrets that the church itself seemed wary to confront. But power is dangerous. The higher they rose, the more enemies they made. Behind their public image as crusading knights, there were deeper currents that historians today still argue over. Some researchers believe the Templars had access to ancient knowledge gathered not only from Jerusalem, but also from contacts with scholars in the Islamic world. They studied medicine, astronomy, and geometry at a time when Europe was locked in superstition. Others suggest that they rediscovered fragments of even older wisdom, Atlantean legends, Egyptian star lore, or hidden maps of lands across the ocean. This is where our story begins to connect. Because if the Templars did indeed hold maps, charts, or ancient manuscripts describing lands beyond the known world, they may have been the first Europeans to seriously consider the possibility of voyages across the Atlantic. But their knowledge came at a cost. By the early 1300s, their wealth and secrecy attracted the wrath of King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to them. With the cooperation of Pope Clement V, Philip orchestrated the infamous arrest of the Templars on Friday the 13th, October 1307. Thousands of knights were captured, tortured, and executed. Their order was officially dissolved. But here lies one of history's greatest mysteries. Not all Templars were arrested. Many escaped. Their fleets disappeared. Their treasures were never found. Some historians claim they fled to Scotland, blending into the shadows of the Highlands. Others say they resurfaced in Portugal under new banners and names. And still others whisper that they sailed west, vanishing into the vast Atlantic with their ships, their treasures, and above all, their knowledge. Could this have been the beginning of a secret mission? If they had carried forbidden relics or maps pointing to strange lands, they may have had a destination in mind, a safe haven where the arm of the church could not reach them. a land where ancient civilizations, like the Maya, were already waiting, holding their own secrets about the stars, time, and destiny. The rise of the Templars, then, was not simply a story of knights and crusades. It was a story of discovery, of contact with hidden knowledge, and of secrets too powerful to remain within the rigid structures of medieval Europe. When we look at their history through this lens, their sudden wealth and influence make more sense. Their mysterious rituals begin to take on a deeper meaning. Their disappearance after persecution begins to feel less like an ending and more like a beginning of another hidden chapter. The Templars, in their meteoric rise, became more than just warriors. They became custodians of a mystery, one that may have taken them across oceans to lands far from the battlefields of the Holy Land. And so, as their power reached its peak and began to crumble, the question remains, what did they really know, and where did they really go when Europe turned against them? This is where the whispers of their meeting with the Maya begin, not as a fanciful legend, but as a logical extension of their search for refuge, knowledge, and destiny. The rise of the Templars is not just the prologue to our story. It is the spark that sets the entire forbidden contact narrative into motion. Far from the castles of Europe and the stone cathedrals of Christendom, across an ocean the medieval world barely understood, there thrived another empire. Hidden in dense jungles, rising from a mist of rainforests and river valleys, the Maya civilization carved its place into history not with steel and crusades, but with stone, astronomy, and time itself. To speak of the Maya is to speak of mystery. Even today, when archaeologists have uncovered countless ruins and deciphered much of their script, the full picture of who the Maya were and how they achieved their brilliance remains tantalizingly out of reach. The Maya were not a single kingdom. They were a constellation of city-states, scattered across present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Each city, Tikal, Palenque, Chichen Itza, Copan, was like a jewel in the jungle, surrounded by towering pyramids, sacred ball courts, and plazas where rituals unfolded under the gaze of stone gods. Their architecture alone defies explanation. Without iron tools, without beasts of burden, without the wheel as a practical instrument of transport, they raised temples that still stand today, aligned with celestial events to a precision that rivals modern observatories. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, the pyramid of Kukulkan reveals a serpent made of light and shadow, slithering down its staircase, a calendar written in stone. But it was not merely architecture that set the Maya apart. It was their obsession with time. The Maya developed calendars so complex, so precise, that they calculated the solar year to within mere seconds of accuracy. They tracked the cycles of Venus with an exactness that astonishes astronomers even today. They wove these cycles into rituals, wars, and coronations, believing that every human action resonated with the rhythms of the cosmos. To the Maya, time was not a straight line. It was cyclical, eternal, repeating. Birth and death, creation and destruction, ages rising and falling like waves. In their codices, painted manuscripts that only a handful of copies survive, thanks to the fires of the Spanish conquest, they recorded cosmic ages stretching back tens of thousands of years. And this obsession with time was not idle curiosity. It was power. The Maya priesthood, cloaked in feathers and jade, claimed to read destiny itself in the movement of the heavens. Kings rose and fell according to prophecies. Wars were waged on dates chosen for their cosmic resonance, and sacrifices were offered not randomly, but as echoes of celestial design. Now pause for a moment. Imagine what it would mean for outsiders, like the Templars, steeped in their own esoteric traditions, to encounter a civilization so deeply connected to the stars, to prophecy, to cycles of creation and destruction. While Europe still wrestled with superstition and rigid dogma, the Maya were charting eclipses centuries in advance. While peasants in France feared comets as divine punishment, Maya astronomer priests recorded them as precise markers in a cosmos. Hidden chambers is further fueled by the pyramid's perfect proportions. Its dimensions, alignments, and ratios leave little room for error. Anomalies are unlike shores in the early 16th century. Many of the great Maya cities had already been abandoned. Jungles swallowed temples. Silence replaced the cries of markets and the drums of rituals. What caused this collapse? Climate change? Warfare? Disease? Or something more elusive? Something tied to the very prophecies the Maya held sacred? For the Templars, who themselves faced destruction at the hands of kings and popes, the Maya story might have resonated deeply. Two civilizations, each accused of heresy, each whispered to guard forbidden knowledge, each rising to great heights before facing sudden collapse. And here lies a haunting question. Were the Maya truly isolated, untouched until the Spanish conquest? Or did they, too, experience visitors from across the sea long before Columbus? Archaeologists point to anomalies, strange depictions in art that seem out of place, myths that speak of pale-skinned strangers arriving in great canoes, even genetic studies that hint at patterns still unexplained. The Maya were not merely mathematicians of time. They were storytellers, priests, and guardians of secrets. If they did meet foreign visitors, if they did encounter men bearing the red cross of the Templars, the exchange would not have been one-sided. It would have been a meeting of two civilizations obsessed with mystery, ritual, and destiny. The Maya offered not just gold or territory, but a worldview, an entire cosmic map that placed human beings within the eternal cycles of the stars. To men like the Templars, trained in symbolism, sacred geometry, and apocalyptic expectation, such knowledge would have been irresistible. And so, before we move further into the theory of forbidden contact, we must understand the magnitude of what the Maya represented. They were not primitive tribes awaiting discovery, as colonial history once painted them. They were masters of sky and stone, builders of calendars that stretched into eternity, priests who saw history itself as prophecy unfolding. Their legacy survives not just in ruined pyramids, but in the silence of jungles, in the alignment of stars, in prophecies that still whisper about the cycles of creation and destruction. This was the world across the Atlantic, a world where time itself was sacred, where cities rose as mirrors of the heavens, where prophecy guided the lives of kings. If the Templars did indeed set sail into the unknown, and if fate or design brought them to these shores, then what they found was not merely another land. They found a mirror to their own hidden quest, a civilization guarding mysteries just as forbidden, just as profound, and just as dangerous. And this is where the two great stories, Templar and Maya, begin to bend toward one another. Two civilizations of secrets, two guardians of knowledge, two cultures fated, perhaps, to collide. Before we can imagine the Templars reaching the New World, we must first confront a deeper question. Was the Atlantic truly an impenetrable barrier before Columbus? For centuries, schoolbooks taught us that the Americas lay completely isolated until 1492, when Christopher Columbus discovered them. But history, as always, is not so simple. Whispers of earlier voyages echo across the ages, hidden in myths, sagas, and maps that should not exist. Let us begin in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The Norse sagas tell of Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, who sailed west around the year 1000. His journey carried him to a land he called Vinland, a place of grapes, forests, and fertile soil, far from the rocky coasts of Greenland. For centuries, scholars debated whether Vinland was legend or reality. But in the 1960s, archaeologists uncovered Norse-style dwellings at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, proving beyond doubt that Vikings had indeed crossed the Atlantic 5 centuries before Columbus. And yet, the Norse were not the only ones. In the dusty libraries of Europe, there exist maps that raise unsettling questions. The Vinland map, though controversial, depicts part of North America long before it was officially charted. The Piri Reis map, drawn by an Ottoman admiral in 1513, contains coastlines of South America and even parts of Antarctica, mapped with an accuracy that seems impossible without advanced navigation or ancient sources. How could such knowledge exist unless travelers had seen these lands before? Legends abound of other voyagers. Irish folklore speaks of Saint Brendan the Navigator, a monk who supposedly sailed west in a skin-covered boat in the 6th century, guided by visions of paradise. The Welsh tell of Prince Madoc, who vanished across the sea in the 12th century, never to return. Some Native American tribes even preserve oral traditions of meeting strangers from across the ocean, pale-skinned visitors who came in great canoes long before the Spanish conquest. These stories, scattered across cultures, form a pattern. The Atlantic was not an unbroken wall. It was a bridge, perilous and vast, but not impossible. Now, place the Templars into this context. By the time their order was persecuted in 1307, they possessed fleets of ships, unrivaled knowledge of navigation, and perhaps most importantly, access to ancient manuscripts. The Templars were not mere warriors. They were custodians of knowledge gathered in Jerusalem, Antioch, and other crossroads of civilizations. Some of those manuscripts may have contained hints of lands far to the west. Consider this. The Mediterranean world had inherited fragments of knowledge from Egypt, Babylon, and Greece. The philosopher Plato, writing in 360 BC, told of Atlantis, a great land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Was Atlantis myth or a distorted memory of transatlantic lands? The Templars, seekers of esoteric truth, would have known these stories well. And then there are the mysterious maps, charts that seem to hint at the Americas before their discovery. Some researchers argue that these maps were copied and recopied from sources far older than the medieval period. If the Templars had access to such documents, their fleets might have sailed with greater confidence than history admits. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence lies not in parchment or saga, but in stone. In the heart of America, carvings and petroglyphs sometimes show symbols that resemble crosses, ships, or armor unknown to native traditions. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these as coincidence or misinterpretation. But when seen through the lens of possibility that Europeans reached these shores centuries earlier, the meaning shifts. And here is where the tension builds. If the Vikings could cross the Atlantic in open wooden ships, why not the Templars in their sturdy fleets? If medieval maps hinted at unknown continents, why would secretive orders not investigate them? If oral traditions tell of strangers arriving before Columbus, why dismiss them so quickly? The Atlantic, after all, is not endless. Currents such as the Gulf Stream carry ships naturally westward. Winds, if followed, can guide even simple vessels across. The journey was perilous, yes, but not impossible, for men with wealth, ships, and desperation. As the Templars were after their persecution, the ocean may have seemed less like a barrier and more like an escape route. Imagine, then, a Templar fleet slipping away from European ports under the cover of darkness, vanishing into the horizon. To the kings of Europe, these ships were simply lost. But what if they weren't lost at all? What if they were following a path already whispered of in sagas, drawn in secret maps, and preserved in fragments of ancient lore? This brings us to the forbidden possibility that the Templars were not only aware of the Americas, but may have set foot there, centuries before Columbus unfurled his sails. And if they did, the Maya, masters of time and sky, may have been waiting. Because the Atlantic was not an empty void. It was a stage upon which forgotten voyages played out, half remembered in legend, half hidden in maps that should not exist. The Vikings, the Irish, the Welsh, perhaps even ancient Egyptians, all left whispers of contact. And in those whispers lies the possibility that the Templars were the final link, the ones who carried not only their wealth but also their forbidden knowledge into the heart of the New World. As we turn the page to the next chapter, keep this in mind. History tells us Europe and the Americas were worlds apart, but the legends tell us otherwise. And when legends, maps, and anomalies begin to align, the line between myth and possibility grows thin. If the Atlantic was indeed crossed long before Columbus, then the Templars had both the motive and the means to join those secret voyagers. And what awaited them beyond the waves was not a primitive wilderness, but a civilization as advanced, as mysterious, and as forbidden as their own. Sometimes, history hides its greatest secrets not in the shadows, but right before our eyes. Symbols carved into stone, patterns that repeat across oceans, a name in an old manuscript that does not quite belong. These fragments, scattered like puzzle pieces, form what some believe to be the forbidden link between the Knights Templar and the Maya civilization. Mainstream historians dismiss the idea outright. After all, they say, there is no concrete proof that the Templars ever crossed the Atlantic. And yet, when we begin to look closely, when we allow ourselves to follow the whispers instead of the textbooks, a different picture begins to emerge, one painted not in broad strokes, but in subtle, almost hidden connections. Let us begin with the cross. The red cross of the Templars, simple yet profound, was their most recognizable emblem. It adorned their shields, banners, and armor. Now, thousands of miles away, among the ruins of Mayan cities, stand stele and carvings etched with cross-like designs. At first glance, they may appear coincidental, geometric motifs common in many cultures. But some researchers note their uncanny similarity, not just in form, but in placement, as if they served both as sacred symbols and navigational markers. One particularly striking example can be found in the ruins of Palenque. Amid its intricate carvings lies a cross-shaped design, central to Maya cosmology, representing the world tree that connects the heavens, earth, and underworld. Compare this to the Templar cross, a symbol that likewise bridged heaven and earth, spirit and matter, divine and human. Were these similarities merely parallel invention? Or did an exchange of symbols occur in ways history refuses to acknowledge? Then there are the codices. Most of the Maya's written heritage was destroyed in the fires of Spanish conquest. But a few codices survived: the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, the Paris Codex. These books, filled with astronomical tables and ritual cycles, reveal a civilization obsessed with recording cosmic patterns. Some fringe scholars claim that marginal notes, strange glyphs, and unexplained diagrams bear resemblance to medieval European script, an almost impossible suggestion unless contact had occurred. Even more tantalizing are reports, though rare and often suppressed, of manuscripts in European archives that contain Mayan-style glyphs alongside Latin or Old French notations. Could these be relics of an encounter? If true, they would be devastating to the Orthodox timeline. And then we turn to the artifacts. In scattered corners of Central America, stories circulate of objects that do not belong. Stone carvings of bearded figures, unusual helmets, or designs that seem foreign to the Maya tradition. Mainstream archaeology explains these as artistic exaggerations, coincidence, or contamination from later colonial influence. But for those willing to look deeper, they stand as clues, physical evidence that outsiders once walked these lands. Some researchers point to the famous Fuente Magna bowl, found in Bolivia, inscribed with what appears to be Sumerian writing. Far older, far from home, and completely inexplicable. Though controversial, it suggests that artifacts do sometimes travel across impossible distances. If Sumerian-like inscriptions can appear in South America, why not Templar crosses in the jungles of Mesoamerica? Even the very maps of the Maya contain hints. Some glyphs describe journeys across water guided by stars to lands far beyond their known territories. Was this purely mythological, or did they recall real encounters with visitors from across the sea? Oral traditions among certain indigenous groups speak of white gods, or foreign teachers who arrived from the East, bearing knowledge of stone and stars. The Spanish later twisted these stories to justify conquest. But what if they were echoes of something far older? Now, consider the architecture. The Maya pyramids, with their precise alignments, their steep steps, and their hidden chambers, evoke comparisons to the sacred architecture of the Old World. The Templars, too, were builders of cathedrals, fortresses, and chapels steeped in sacred geometry. Could techniques, proportions, or even philosophical ideas about architecture have been exchanged? It is not proof, but it is a question that lingers when one stands beneath the shadow of both Chartres Cathedral and Chichen Itza. Perhaps the most forbidden clue of all lies in the timing. The Templars fell in 1307, their fleet vanishing into the unknown. Barely 2 centuries later, Columbus sailed west, armed with maps and information he should not have had. Could it be that knowledge preserved by fugitive Templars eventually found its way into the hands of later explorers? If so, the Maya may have been among the first recipients of that knowledge. Here lies the heart of the mystery. These clues are not singular. Each, taken alone, can be dismissed as coincidence, forgery, or misinterpretation. But together, they form a pattern, a web of whispers stretching across the Atlantic. A cross in Palenque, a glyph in a codex, an artifact that does not belong, a story passed down through generations. It is as if the traces of contact were deliberately scattered, faint enough to be ignored, yet resilient enough to survive. Mainstream history, focused on conquest and empire, overlooks these fragments. But those fragments remain, like cracks in a carefully painted wall, hinting at the truth beneath. And so, the forbidden link remains hidden in plain sight, not in grand discoveries or undeniable proofs, but in the subtle overlaps where 2 worlds, Templar and Maya, seem to touch. For those who dare to connect the dots, the picture that emerges is astonishing. A picture of a contact story that should not exist, and yet refuses to disappear. When one gazes upon the soaring cathedrals of Europe or the towering pyramids of Mesoamerica, the first impression is awe. The scale, the precision, the beauty, all constructed without the aid of modern machines. But look more closely, and something else begins to emerge. A shared language of numbers, ratios, and geometry. Sacred geometry. This phrase alone carries weight. It speaks to the idea that numbers are not mere abstractions, but keys to understanding the universe. That proportions, when arranged with care, can open doorways to higher realities. Both the Knights Templar and the Maya civilization seem to know this secret. The question is, how? The geometry of the Templars were not simply warriors. They were also builders. In fact, many historians argue their true power came not from the sword, but from the stone. Across Europe, Templar influence is visible in chapels, commanderies, and fortresses, many aligned with uncanny precision to celestial events. Take the Templar churches modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Round structures designed not just for worship, but for resonance, acoustics, and symbolic power. Within these buildings, scholars have uncovered layouts based on ratios like the Golden Mean, 1:1, 6:18, and the Vesica Piscis, a sacred shape formed by overlapping circles. These proportions were believed to mirror divine harmony, a bridge between heaven and earth. Templar cathedrals were also filled with astronomical alignments. Sunlight streaming through a rose window on equinox, a hidden chamber positioned to mark the solstice. These are not accidents. The Templars worked with master masons and geomancers who understood that architecture was more than utility, it was a ritual in stone. The geometry of the Mayan now travel across the Atlantic deep into the jungles of Mesoamerica. Here, among the ruins of Maya cities, the same obsession reveals itself. The Pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza, for example, is not just a monument, it is a calendar. 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, plus the top platform, make 365, the exact number of days in a solar year. Twice a year, on the equinox, the setting sun casts the illusion of a serpent slithering down the staircase, uniting heaven and earth in a cosmic drama of light and shadow. The Maya aligned their temples to Venus, the moon, and the stars. They built observatories like El Caracol, where windows perfectly frame astronomical events. Their sacred ball courts, with walls echoing sound in strange and deliberate ways, seem designed not just for sport, but for ceremony, architecture as ritual, as cosmic theater. Their numbers were not arbitrary. Ratios, cycles, and alignments governed their world. Like the Templars, they believed that to build in harmony with the cosmos was to bring order into chaos, to invite divine presence into the human realm. A shared language across oceans? Here lies the mystery. How could two civilizations, separated by an ocean, express such similar ideas through architecture? Some would argue it is coincidence, that human beings everywhere looked up at the same stars and found similar solutions. Yet the parallels run deeper than stargazing. Both cultures revered the cross as a cosmic symbol. Both embedded the golden ratio in their sacred spaces. Both saw architecture as a living manifestation of divine law. Even more intriguing are the similarities in layout. Scholars have noted that the ground plans of certain Maya cities bear resemblance to European cathedral layouts, with cardinal orientations, axial symmetry, and symbolic geometry. Could this be accidental? Or is it evidence that knowledge crossed the sea long before Columbus? The esoteric thread, the Templars were said to be guardians of ancient wisdom. Some traditions claim they inherited secret knowledge from the Temple of Solomon, knowledge older than Christianity itself. Among this wisdom was the principle that geometry is sacred, that to shape stone in divine proportion is to align with the cosmos. The Maya, too, claimed their knowledge was inherited from gods, from ancestors, from beings who descended from the stars. Their sky watchers recorded planetary cycles with such accuracy that even modern astronomers remain impressed. Both civilizations saw themselves as custodians of cosmic law, expressed through number and form. Could it be that both were drawing from the same primordial source? Perhaps not through direct contact alone, but through a shared inheritance of ancient, forgotten knowledge, fragments of a much older civilization lost to history. Suppressed connections, here the story takes on a conspiratorial edge. During the Spanish conquest, many Maya codices were burned by friars who declared them heretical. Entire libraries of cosmic knowledge went up in flames. At the same time, in Europe, the Templars were erased, their archives seized, their secrets buried beneath accusations of heresy. What if both destructions were deliberate? A coordinated erasure of two civilizations that shared too much? After all, if it were ever proven that Old World and New World cultures had exchanged sacred geometry, maps, or knowledge centuries before Columbus, it would shatter the orthodox timeline of history. And so, what remains are fragments. A ratio here, a symbol there, clues scattered across two continents, waiting for the curious to piece them together. Modern implications today, architects, mathematicians, and spiritual seekers continue to uncover these mysteries. They marvel at how the Maya calculated eclipses centuries in advance. They study how the Templars embedded mystical ratios into cathedrals that still inspire awe. More than that, they wonder if the true purpose of sacred geometry has been forgotten. For both the Maya and the Templars, architecture was not simply shelter or spectacle. It was a spiritual technology, a way to transform human consciousness, to align mind and body with the rhythms of the cosmos. If these two civilizations did, in fact, meet, or even if they simply tapped into the same hidden current of wisdom, their message is the same. The universe is not random. It is ordered, structured, and accessible through number and form. And to build in harmony with it is to walk closer to the divine. A question that lingers, so we are left with a tantalizing possibility. Did the Templars, fleeing persecution, bring their knowledge of sacred geometry across the sea, finding in the Maya not strangers, but kindred spirits? Did two worlds, supposedly separate, recognize one another through the universal language of number and stone? It is a question history refuses to answer, but one the ruins themselves seem to whisper. In the quiet of a cathedral nave or the shadow of a jungle pyramid, one feels the same presence, a rhythm older than empires, a geometry that belongs to no single people, but to the cosmos itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, that rhythm was once shared across oceans in a forbidden meeting we're only now beginning to rediscover. The year was 1307. On the morning of October 13th, a Friday, the most powerful order of knights in Christendom was betrayed. Acting on secret orders from King Philip IV of France, royal forces moved swiftly to arrest the Knights Templar. They were accused of heresy, idolatry, and blasphemy, charges as theatrical as they were convenient. By the end of that day, many Templars were in chains. Others were tortured, interrogated, or executed. The order that had once commanded armies, guarded pilgrims, and financed kings was shattered overnight. And yet, not everything was captured. Not everyone was arrested. Something, or rather, somewhere, slipped through the net. The fleet that disappeared the Templars were not only knights and monks. They were also sailors. From their strongholds along the coasts of France, Portugal, and the Mediterranean, they had built a formidable navy. Some chroniclers described their fleet at La Rochelle, a bustling French port, as second only to that of the great kingdoms of Europe. When Philip's men arrived, they expected to find dozens of Templar ships anchored, waiting to be seized. But according to the records, the harbor was empty. Not a single Templar vessel remained. The fleet, their treasure, their men, their secrets had vanished. Where did it go? This is the question that has haunted historians and conspiracy theorists alike for centuries. The answer may hold the key to one of the greatest historical mysteries of all time, and perhaps even to the whispers of contact with the Maya. Mainstream explanations, Orthodox historians have proposed a few modest theories. Some argue the fleet was simply smaller than legend claims, and whatever ships the Templars owned were quietly absorbed by local lords or rival powers. Others suggest the ships sailed to England or Portugal, where monarchs were less hostile to the order. But these explanations feel too tidy, too small. They do not account for the silence, for the total disappearance. They do not explain how such a powerful organization could simply dissolve without leaving a trace. The Portuguese connection Portugal offers the first real clue. King Denis of Portugal refused to persecute the Templars with the same zeal as Philip. Instead, he quietly reorganized them into a new order, the Order of Christ, allowing their lands, resources, and ships to survive under a different name. This order would later play a central role in the Age of Discovery. Henry the Navigator, the architect of Portugal's overseas empire, was himself a grand master of the Order of Christ. Many of the navigational secrets that powered Portugal's voyages, maps, star charts, techniques, are thought to have originated from the Templars. So, did part of the fleet slip south into friendly Portuguese waters? If so, what knowledge did they carry? And did their journeys extend beyond Europe, perhaps across the Atlantic itself? Scotland, the Shadow Refuge, another tradition, places the missing fleet in Scotland. At the time, Scotland was at war with England, and Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated by the Pope. This made him an ideal ally for fugitive Templars. Some legends claim Templar ships sailed north, landing on the rugged Scottish coast. There, they supposedly aided Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, their mysterious cavalry tipping the balance against the English. From this point, the Templars supposedly integrated into Scottish society, their legacy echoing through Freemasonry centuries later. But if ships did reach Scotland, it raises another question. Were they merely seeking refuge, or were they staging grounds for voyages farther still? Across the Atlantic, this is where the story enters forbidden territory. Some researchers suggest the Templars, armed with secret knowledge, perhaps maps of lands beyond the horizon, sailed west. Evidence for this is circumstantial but intriguing. For instance, the Zeno map, created in the 14th century, shows islands in the Atlantic long before Columbus. Some argue that its accuracy suggests access to older, hidden cartography, the kind the Templars might have preserved. Then there is the infamous Vinland map, suggesting Norse exploration of North America. The Norse were indeed skilled sailors, and it is possible the Templars inherited routes, charts, or even direct contacts from them. Could the fleet of La Rochelle have followed these paths, pushing beyond Greenland to the rich lands further south? The treasure theory, another tantalizing angle. The Templar treasure. For centuries, rumors have swirled about vast hoards of gold, relics, and holy objects hidden away before the Order's fall. Some claim the treasure was spirited away on the vanished fleet. If true, then wherever the ships went, the treasure went with them. Was it buried in Scotland, hidden in Portugal, or carried across the Atlantic to a secret stronghold in the New World? Stories of buried treasure in Nova Scotia, particularly the famous mystery of Oak Island, are often linked to the Templars. Some researchers believe the labyrinth of shafts and tunnels there conceals remnants of Templar wealth, protected for centuries. Contact with the Maya? Now, let's return to the Maya. Imagine the fleet, fleeing from persecution, carrying both treasure and forbidden knowledge. Where could they go that was truly beyond the reach of Europe's kings and popes? The jungles of Mesoamerica may have offered such refuge. If the Templars did cross the Atlantic, it is conceivable they could have encountered the Maya, a civilization with its own mastery of astronomy, architecture, and sacred law. Two orders, separated by oceans, suddenly face to face. Did they exchange knowledge? Symbols? Did the Templars leave behind fragments of their presence in Maya lands? A cross here, a carving there, subtle enough to be dismissed, but enduring across time? This idea may sound radical, but it ties the threads together. The vanished fleet, the suppressed connections, the scattered clues in Maya ruins. Silence in the records. One thing is certain. After 1307, the Templar fleet disappears from the historical record. Ships, men, treasure, archives gone. For an organization as wealthy and powerful as the Templars, such a disappearance is not natural. It is deliberate, and perhaps that is the point. Perhaps they succeeded in what so many others failed to do: vanish into legend, carrying with them the secrets they swore to protect. A legacy that echoes whether the fleet found sanctuary in Portugal, refuge in Scotland, or new horizons across the Atlantic. Its disappearance reshaped history. The knowledge it carried seems to echo in later centuries, in the Portuguese voyages of discovery, in the esoteric traditions of Freemasonry, in whispers of buried treasure and forbidden contact. The Templar fleet is a ghost, but one that casts a long shadow. A shadow that stretches, perhaps, all the way to the jungles of Central America. And it is here, in this shadow, that the possibility of their meeting with the Maya becomes more than fantasy. It becomes a question that refuses to go away. Maps are more than drawings. They are memory etched in ink, whispers of journeys taken, knowledge preserved. A true map is a statement. We were there. We saw this. We measured, recorded, remembered. And yet, across the pages of history, there exist maps that should not exist, maps that depict lands long before they were officially discovered. They are relics of knowledge that has no place in the official timeline, and they may hold the key to understanding what became of the vanished Templar fleet. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral using older source charts he claimed to have inherited. This parchment fragment shows the coasts of Africa, Europe, and, astonishingly, South America, decades before Europeans supposedly mapped those regions in detail. Even more mysterious, the lower section of the map appears to show Antarctica, not only free of ice but drawn with surprising accuracy. Antarctica, according to conventional history, was not discovered until the 19th century. Yet here it is, inked centuries earlier, preserved on an Ottoman chart. How could this be possible? Scholars admit that Piri Reis himself did not travel so widely. He openly confessed that his work was a compilation, drawn from older maps, some said to date back to the time of Alexander the Great. Others whisper that these sources were none other than the secret archives of vanished brotherhoods, fragments of knowledge passed hand to hand through centuries. And if the Templars had indeed carried secret charts across the sea, fleeing from persecution, is it impossible to think that fragments of their knowledge eventually found their way into the hands of Ottoman navigators? Another enigma is the Zeno map of 1380, created by Venetian brothers who claim to have sailed in the North Atlantic. This map depicts islands, coastlines, and features that match Greenland, parts of North America, and phantom lands that no longer exist. Though mainstream historians argue about its authenticity, the Zeno map appeared decades before Columbus, already hinting that the Atlantic was not as mysterious as the textbooks suggest. Did the Venetian brothers inherit knowledge from Templar sailors, fugitives who had slipped into northern waters after the Order's fall? The Vinland map, though steeped in controversy, adds another layer. Purportedly created in the 15th century, it depicts parts of the North American coast labeled Vinland, echoing Norse sagas of voyages to new lands. Mainstream scholars fight over its authenticity, yet the simple fact remains: the idea of a land west of Greenland was alive in Europe long before Columbus sailed. Someone had been there, someone had charted it, and someone had kept that knowledge hidden. It is within these anomalous maps that the ghost of the Templars seems to stir. For an order that once possessed both naval power and esoteric knowledge, maps would have been treasures more valuable than gold. A map is not just parchment. It is a claim to power, a roadmap to survival, a key to escape. If the Templars fled La Rochelle with their fleet, what would they have carried with them? Not simply treasure, but charts, instructions on where to go, where to hide, where to build again. The Maya, too, were cartographers of kind. Their codices contain depictions of journeys, sea routes, and cosmic maps of the heavens. The Dresden Codex reveals calculations of Venus's cycles so precise that modern astronomers remain impressed. Though not maps in the European sense, these records show the Maya viewed the world as navigable, structured, interconnected. Imagine, then, the shock and recognition if two knowledge systems met, one based on sacred geometry and star charts, the other on advanced seafaring maps and hidden coastlines. Would they not find common ground? Would they not recognize one another as keepers of the same cosmic language? But here is where the conspiracy deepens. During the conquest of the New World, Spanish officials reported finding strange maps among indigenous groups, showing lands across the sea. Some of these accounts survive only in fragments, hints of something quickly suppressed. The Spanish crown and the church would have had every reason to bury any evidence suggesting Europe was not the first to cross the Atlantic. If Templar knowledge had indeed found its way into Maya hands, it would have been a heresy too great to allow. And so, like the burning of Maya codices, such maps would have been destroyed, leaving us only with whispers. There are even stories of maps locked away in the Vatican archives, never shown to the public, guarded with the same secrecy as the Church's most sacred relics. Some claim these hidden charts reveal ancient coastlines, transatlantic routes, or even star maps connecting Old World and New. If true, it would explain the eerie silence in mainstream history. The knowledge is there, simply not for us to see. Consider this. Columbus himself sailed west not into the unknown, but armed with charts. How else could he have been so certain of landfall? His voyage, painted as a daring leap into mystery, begins to look instead like the execution of a plan based on older knowledge. Where did he acquire such charts? Some argue through Portuguese channels, where the Order of Christ, the rebranded Templars, still held sway. Perhaps Columbus's famous voyage was not a beginning at all, but the culmination of Templar discoveries buried for centuries. The deeper one looks, the more the pattern emerges. A trail of forbidden maps, stretching from medieval Venice to Ottoman Istanbul, from Norse sagas to Iberian archives. Each one a flicker of memory, a hint that someone had already walked the paths later called discoveries. And behind them, the silent shadow of the vanished Templars, sailors without a home, knowledge without a master, carrying with them secrets of the world's true shape. If the Templars did reach the Americas, then maps would have been their proof, their legacy. Some may have survived in hidden codices, others in European archives, still others disguised, recopied, and scattered until their origins were forgotten. And yet, when pieced together, they suggest something astonishing, that the meeting of Old World and New happened not in 1492, but centuries earlier, carried in the holds of ships that disappeared from La Rochelle. It is a narrative that challenges the very foundation of history. It suggests that exploration was not a sudden burst of genius in the 15th century, but the continuation of a thread deliberately hidden. And that thread may well have been woven by the Templars, a brotherhood erased in name, but not in influence. Thus, the cartographer's secret lingers, preserved in maps that defy explanation. Maps that whisper of journeys unrecorded, of contacts forbidden, of civilizations that met long before history allowed them to. Maps that remind us that sometimes the greatest discoveries are not in the lands we find, but in the knowledge someone tried so very hard to erase. The written word is civilization's memory. Every culture that sought to endure beyond the fleeting breath of a single generation turned to ink, clay, or stone to record its wisdom. For the Maya, that memory was captured in books, sacred codices made from the bark of the Almaty tree, painted with hieroglyphs so precise they could chart the stars, calculate eclipses, and describe rituals in alignment with cosmic cycles. For the Templars, memory was guarded in archives, encrypted scrolls, and documents hidden in the vaults of commanderies. Both civilizations understood that knowledge is power, and power is dangerous when it falls into the wrong hands. Perhaps that is why, across continents and centuries, both their legacies are defined not only by what survives, but by what was deliberately destroyed. When the Spanish arrived in Mesoamerica, they did not encounter savages ignorant of writing, but a people with libraries. The Maya codices were more than books. They were doorways into a worldview where the earthly and celestial were bound as one. In the city of Mani, in 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa ordered a great burning. He gathered armfuls of Maya texts, hundreds of books written in their elegant glyphs, and consigned them to flames. His justification was chilling in its simplicity. They contained nothing in which there were not superstitions and lies of the devil. In that fire, centuries of memory, history, science, astronomy, cosmology were reduced to ash. Only a handful of codices survive today, scattered in European libraries, fragments of a once vast library of thought. Yet what was destroyed is perhaps less disturbing than what might have been saved. In whispers, in rumors preserved by later chroniclers, there are suggestions that some codices were not burned, but taken. Priests and conquistadors who understood their value smuggled them away, shipping them to Spain, where they disappeared into private collections or the locked shelves of the Vatican Library. What truths do those hidden books contain? Could they record encounters with strange visitors, men from across the sea who arrived not in the 16th century, but long before? The idea may seem impossible, yet history is filled with such shadows. The Templars, too, had their archives, records of their immense wealth, secret rites, maps of hidden routes, and perhaps knowledge too dangerous for the public eye. When the order fell, much of its documentation vanished overnight. In France, royal officials raided Templar houses only to find empty chests. The most important documents, it seems, had already been spirited away. Where did they go? Some say to Portugal, hidden under the protection of the Order of Christ. Others whisper of archives carried aboard the fleeing fleet at La Rochelle, bound for lands unknown. Imagine, then, a convergence. The Templars carrying secret scrolls, heretical texts, perhaps even ancient manuscripts they were said to have found beneath Solomon's temple. The Mayas safeguarding their codices, preserving cosmic wisdom written in an alien script that Europeans could barely comprehend. What if across the ocean, these two streams of memory briefly met? What if some of the Templar writings were absorbed into Maya archives, while Maya knowledge was copied or carried into European hands? The destruction of the codices may not have been a simple act of religious zealotry, but a targeted purge, an effort to erase evidence of such a meeting. There are tantalizing hints. In the Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya books that survived, scholars have found astonishing calculations of Venus's movements, accurate to a fraction of a day over centuries. Venus, the morning star, was sacred to both Mesoamerican priests and to European mystics, who saw in it a symbol of illumination and hidden knowledge. The Templars, accused of worshipping a mysterious head known as Baphomet, may well have been engaging in esoteric astronomy of their own. Could fragments of a shared astronomical language have existed in these now-lost texts, a sign of intellectual exchange long before history allows it? Then there are the strange gaps in the historical record. Spanish chroniclers like Bartolomé de las Casas hinted that the native people spoke of ancient visitors, white-skinned men with beards, who came from across the sea bringing knowledge of architecture and navigation. Mainstream historians dismiss these accounts as myth, but within the codices, such legends might have been written with far greater detail. If such pages ever existed, they would have been threatening indeed. To acknowledge them would mean rewriting the narrative of conquest. Better than to consign them to fire or to lock them away where only a few would ever see. The Vatican Library looms large in this mystery. A labyrinth of shelves, it holds millions of documents, many never studied by outside eyes. Scholars admit that among its contents are indigenous manuscripts brought back by missionaries, texts deemed too dangerous to release. If even one Maya codex describing contact with outsiders lies hidden there, the silence makes sense. Such a discovery would collapse centuries of carefully guarded history. It would reveal that Europe's so-called Age of Discovery was no discovery at all, but an unveiling of lands already known, mapped, and perhaps even settled by others long before Columbus raised his sails. But perhaps the most haunting thought is that some of these lost books are not lost at all. They may survive, buried in private collections, jealously guarded by families who know their value but fear their implications. Just as fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced centuries after they were hidden, so too might fragments of Maya codices or Templar archives emerge one day, revealing pieces of a puzzle we can only guess at now. Until then, what we are left with is the silence between fragments, a missing archive that speaks louder than the surviving texts. The codices we do have are enough to show us what has been lost. The Madrid Codex, with its almanacs of rituals and agricultural cycles. The Paris Codex, filled with prophecies of future cartoons. The Dresden Codex, an astronomical masterpiece. And yet, all of them are incomplete, like single chapters torn from a vast library. The Templars' fate is much the same. Scattered fragments, hints of a secret tradition, whispers of archives carried away into the night. In both cases, the destruction is too precise to be mere accident. It feels deliberate, as though someone wanted to ensure that only silence remained. And in that silence, imagination begins to whisper. Did the Templars preserve records of their journey to the New World, only for those records to slip into Maya hands, then into Spanish ones, and finally into locked vaults? Did the Maya record their encounters with strangers from across the sea, only for those testimonies to be destroyed by fire? Perhaps the greatest codex of all, the one that told the story of two civilizations meeting in secrecy, lies ash and dust now, scattered by the wind over 5 centuries ago. Or perhaps it still exists, waiting, hidden, until the world is ready to read it. For knowledge has a way of surviving, even when its guardians fall. The Templars were erased in name, yet their symbols and legends endure. The Maya saw their cities collapse, yet their calendar and cosmic science remain. And though their codices burn, the memory of what they might have contained continues to haunt us, demanding we ask a forbidden question. What truth was so dangerous that it had to be erased from both sides of the ocean? The Maya world was a world of memory. They did not merely live in the present. They lived suspended between the weight of the past and the cycles of the future. To them, time was not linear but circular, repeating endlessly, echoing patterns across centuries. Their sacred books, the codices, were the anchors of this cosmic order. Thin bark paper folded like accordion screens, covered in hieroglyphs so intricate that a single page could hold entire layers of meaning. These books were not stories in the way we think of them, but manuals of existence. Astronomy tables, ritual instructions, prophecies, calendars, histories, and diagrams of the heavens. In them, priests could chart eclipses centuries in advance, farmers could know when the rains would come, and rulers could time their wars to celestial alignments. They were, in every sense, the embodiment of Maya civilization. And yet, when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, these libraries were treated not as treasures but as threats. In 1562, in the Yucatán town of Mani, Bishop Diego de Landa staged one of the most infamous acts of cultural destruction in human history. In front of horrified Maya witnesses, he ordered piles of their books to be burned. He recorded his act with chilling detachment, writing that the books contained nothing in which there were not superstitions and lies of the devil. With that fire, centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash in a single day. Imagine standing there as the painted glyphs blackened and curled, as knowledge of the stars and seasons dissolved into smoke, as prophecies that had guided generations vanished forever. But fire does not always consume everything. Whispers persisted that not all codices perished that day. Some were hidden away, buried in caves, or tucked into temple walls by desperate hands. Others, seized by Spanish priests who recognized their importance, were shipped back to Europe. There, they may have disappeared into private collections or into the locked shelves of the Vatican Library, a place long rumored to contain manuscripts the Church would rather the world never read. The handful of surviving codices give us a glimpse of what was lost. The Dresden Codex, preserved today in Germany, contains astonishing astronomical calculations of the planet Venus. Its tables are so precise that modern scholars marvel at how the Maya achieved such accuracy without telescopes. The Madrid Codex, held in Spain, is filled with ritual almanacs, agricultural guidance, and divinatory charts. The Paris Codex, fragmented but still legible, preserves cycles of time and prophecies stretching far into the future. Taken together, they reveal a civilization that understood the universe in ways we are only beginning to appreciate. And yet they are fragments, 3 books out of what was once a library of hundreds, perhaps thousands. The Templars across the ocean also had their libraries, though theirs were far more secretive. In their commanderies, in vaults beneath their castles, in the archives of Paris, they preserved charters, financial ledgers, maps, theological treatises, and perhaps something more. When the order was destroyed in 1307, officials raided their houses looking for incriminating evidence. But again and again, they found empty chests. The most important documents, it seems, had already been spirited away. Chronicles hint at caravans of carts loaded with sealed chests departing Paris in the night, vanishing into the countryside before the king's men could seize them. At La Rochelle, Templar ships slipped away from the harbor, carrying not only men, but also whatever treasures the order valued most. Some believe these archives contained texts retrieved from beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, heretical writings, esoteric knowledge, maps of lands across the seas, perhaps even ancient manuscripts whose origins lay far deeper in time. Now imagine the convergence of these 2 streams of hidden knowledge. If Templars really did sail westward before Columbus, as some legends claim, they would have carried with them documents, maps, charts, scrolls that testify to their discoveries. And if they met the Maya, it is not impossible to imagine that some exchange of knowledge occurred. Maya scribes could have recorded the arrival of these bearded strangers, incorporating the encounter into their codices. Likewise, the Templars might have copied Maya astronomical knowledge into their own archives, marveling at its sophistication. The loss of both the Templar and Maya libraries may not have been mere accident, but part of a pattern, a deliberate effort to erase any evidence of such a meeting. Hints linger in the surviving material. The Dresden Codex's Venus tables resonate strangely with European mystical traditions, where Venus was also seen as a symbol of illumination, the morning star that heralds new cycles. The Templars, accused of worshipping a mysterious figure called Baphomet, may in fact have been engaging in esoteric star worship themselves. Scholars still debate whether the name Baphomet hides a coded reference to wisdom traditions, perhaps even astronomical deities. Is it possible that two cultures, separated by an ocean, were both charting the same celestial mysteries in parallel, and perhaps even cross-pollinating their traditions in secret? Spanish chroniclers add to the intrigue. Some recorded that the Maya and Aztec spoke of ancient visitors, pale-skinned, bearded men who came from across the sea long before Columbus. These tales are usually dismissed as myth or retroactive explanations after contact with Europeans. But what if they were older memories, preserved in oral tradition and perhaps in the lost codices? If those books had survived, they might have contained detailed accounts of such visitors. For the conquerors, such testimony would have been deeply inconvenient. Better to declare the books diabolical and burn them, erasing not only the Maya worldview, but also any record of forbidden contact. The Vatican Library remains the most likely resting place of any codices that survive the flames. Within its sealed archives lie millions of manuscripts, many never studied by outsiders. Scholars admit that among them are indigenous texts taken from the Americas in the 16th century. If even one codex describing contact with strangers exists in those vaults, it would explain centuries of silence. The implications would be explosive. Europe did not discover the New World, but rediscovered it, and others may have come before. And yet, perhaps the most haunting thought is that some of these texts are still out there, beyond the Vatican, hidden in private hands. Wealthy collectors have long trafficked in ancient manuscripts. A Maya codex or a Templar scroll would be priceless and terrifying in its implications. To reveal it would be to rewrite history itself. That is why, perhaps, these books remain hidden, surfacing only in rumors, whispered about but never seen. The silence of the missing books is louder than the words on the surviving pages. Every gap invites speculation. Every burned codex is a question mark. Did the Maya record encounters with strangers from across the sea? Did the Templars preserve accounts of their westward voyages? Were these two archives, separated by oceans, but united by fate, deliberately targeted for destruction because they contained the same secret? Foreknowledge is never neutral. To the conquerors, the Maya codices were dangerous because they preserved a worldview outside Christian doctrine. To the kings of Europe, the Templar archives were dangerous because they held knowledge outside royal control. In both cases, destruction was a form of control, to burn, to hide, to silence. And yet, even destroyed, the memory lingers. The few surviving codices continue to dazzle scholars. The scattered fragments of Templar history continue to inspire endless speculation. Perhaps, one day, a forgotten chest in a monastery will be opened, and within it a codex will be found, its glyphs still vivid after centuries. Or perhaps a hidden vault beneath a castle will yield a scroll, written in Latin, describing a voyage across the Western Sea. Until then, we are left with fragments, silences, and possibilities. But in those silences, imagination finds fertile ground. It is there, between what is lost and what is hinted, that the story of the Templars and the Maya lives on, a forbidden memory erased by fire, yet refusing to be forgotten. Stone is the most enduring witness of history. While parchment burns, while codices crumble, while words vanish into silence, stone remains. It absorbs the touch of chisels, the breath of builders, and the vision of civilizations, standing long after their people fade into myth. The Maya understood this deeply. They carved their gods, their kings, their calendars, and their cosmos into the living rock of their temples. The Templars understood it as well, erecting fortresses across Europe and the Holy Land, embedding symbols into arches, chapels, and tombs. To look closely at these two distant traditions is to glimpse an unsettling possibility that somewhere, somehow, a common thread may have tied them together. Across the jungles of Central America rise the remnants of Maya cities. Pyramids that pierce the canopy, plazas aligned to the solstices, stele inscribed with glyphs recounting the deeds of rulers. Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Tikal, Palenque. These places are not simply ruins, but messages in stone, frozen in time. At Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan is a calendar in architecture, each of its 365 steps marking a day of the year, its sides aligned so that on the equinox a serpent of light slithers down the stairs, embodying the descent of the feathered god. At Uxmal, the Pyramid of the Magician rises with curves unlike any other, a structure that seems to defy conventional building methods. At Palenque, the Temple of Inscriptions guards the tomb of Pakal the Great, its walls covered in carvings that some say depict journeys not only of the soul, but perhaps across the stars. Now, shift across the ocean, to Europe, to the Templar churches. Round towers echoing the form of the Temple of Solomon, carved crosses and cryptic symbols etched into walls, hidden passages beneath chapels. The Templars were not simply warriors, they were master builders. Their architecture carried meaning, geometry, proportion, celestial alignment. At Tomar in Portugal, their great convent is aligned with astronomical precision. In France, at churches like Léon and Chartres, subtle engravings hint at deeper layers of symbolism, perhaps even encoded maps or cosmic diagrams. When placed side by side, the resonances are uncanny. Both cultures embedded calendars into stone. Both aligned their monuments to solstices and equinoxes, encoding the heavens into earth. Both used sacred geometry, creating spaces that reflected spiritual truths through mathematical harmony. To a mainstream historian, this is coincidence, two civilizations arriving at similar solutions to universal human questions. But to those who look closer, it suggests the possibility of shared knowledge, perhaps transmitted across oceans by secret contact. Carvings offer even more tantalizing hints. Among the Maya, certain stele show figures with unusual features. Long beards, foreign clothing, symbols that do not fit easily within the known pantheon. Some of these are explained as artistic exaggerations, but others remain puzzling. Could they represent encounters with outsiders? The Templars, too, carved enigmatic figures. Knights kneeling before mysterious idols, inscriptions that blend Latin with symbols that have yet to be decoded, and crosses that echo older pagan motifs. What if these symbols migrated across seas, appearing first in Europe, then echoing in the stonework of a new world? Or the other way around? What if knowledge flowed east to west, carried back by secret fleets? Consider the serpent imagery. The feathered serpent Kukulkan, or Quetzalcoatl to the Aztec, was a bringer of wisdom, often depicted as a bearded man descending from the sky or arriving from across the sea. Templar symbolism, though shrouded in secrecy, also revered serpentine imagery, not overtly, but hidden in their mystical allegories, where the serpent represented hidden knowledge, illumination, or the cycle of death and rebirth. Could it be that both traditions, when stripped to their essence, were drawing from the same ancient archetype, one preserved in stone across continents? Then there are the mysteries of engineering. Maya builders achieved feats of acoustics that still astound modern visitors. Clap your hands before the pyramid of Kukulkan, and the echo returns as the call of the Quetzal bird, sacred to the Maya. Speak in certain corners of the ball courts, and your voice carries perfectly to the opposite end. These were not accidents. They were intentional manipulations of sound, encoded into stone. The Templars, too, mastered acoustics. Their round churches and vaulted chapels were designed so that chants and prayers reverberated in perfect harmony, amplifying the spiritual atmosphere. Was this convergence purely parallel evolution, or did one tradition whisper secrets to the other across hidden channels of contact? Archaeologists sometimes stumble upon anomalies that defy explanation. In Central America, carvings appear that resemble crosses, not the native cross of the four directions alone, but shapes strikingly similar to the Christian cross of Europe. Were these coincidences of form or evidence of symbolic blending? Some researchers argue that the Maya cross predates Christianity and represents cosmological balance. Others whisper that when outsiders came, they recognized a resonance and reinterpreted it. If Templars stood before Maya priests, might they have seen in each other's symbols a mirror of their own? And what are the so-called forbidden glyphs, those rare inscriptions whose meaning scholars still debate? Some seem to depict ships, sails, or foreign visitors. Mainstream historians dismiss them as imaginative or ceremonial. But to those who believe in suppressed history, they are silent witnesses to encounters deliberately erased from the record. It is here, in these half-deciphered glyphs and ambiguous carvings, that the shadow of Templar contact seems to flicker just beyond reach. Stone also remembers destruction. Many Maya temples bear marks of sudden collapse, of fires, of deliberate defacement. Spanish conquistadors often tore down pyramids to build churches on their foundations, seeking to erase one memory with another. But what if some of that erasure began earlier? What if certain carvings were deliberately destroyed not by Spaniards, but by the Maya themselves, erasing records of encounters they wished to forget or to keep secret from outsiders? The Templars knew this impulse well. When their order fell, many of their castles were demolished, their symbols scraped from stone, their chapels rededicated. Yet enough fragments survive to haunt us, whispers in stone that speak of hidden truths. In both traditions, architecture was not just functional, it was mystical. A temple or a chapel was a book written in stone, legible only to those initiated into its secrets. To the uninitiated, it was a place of worship. To the initiated, it was a map of the cosmos, a guide to hidden realities. If, in some distant moment of contact, Maya and Templar shared knowledge, it would have been in this language of stone, a language that transcends words, codices, or parchments. It would have been carved into pyramids and castles, waiting for us to notice centuries later. And perhaps we have noticed, but chosen to look away. Scholars explain away the similarities as coincidence. Yet the more we look, the more the parallels pile up. Alignment with solstices, calendars and architecture, serpent imagery, acoustic engineering, sacred geometry. Each on its own might be dismissed. Together, they form a pattern too precise to ignore. It is as though the stones themselves are trying to speak, to tell us a story long forgotten, a story of encounter, exchange, and perhaps a forbidden brotherhood between two civilizations worlds apart. If the codices are the silenced voices of the Maya, then the stones are their whispers that remain. If the Templar archives are locked away, then their architecture is the key left in plain sight. And when these two sets of whispers are listened to together, a picture begins to emerge. Incomplete, ambiguous, but powerful. A picture of a world where knowledge crossed oceans in secret, where two traditions of builders met, and where their encounter was carved into the bones of the earth itself. Maps are among humanity's most dangerous creations. They seem harmless at first, ink on parchment, lines across a page. But every map is a claim, a statement of what is known, what is hidden, and what must remain secret. To draw a coastline is to admit you have seen it. To sketch an island is to confess you have sailed there. And in the age of secrecy, when knowledge meant power, maps were guarded more fiercely than gold. The Templars knew this well. Their survival depended on the control of routes, not just on land but also across seas. The Maya, too, though less celebrated as navigators, were part of a vast Mesoamerican trading system that stretched from highland valleys to distant coasts. When we place their traditions side by side, the possibility emerges that hidden maps, forbidden cartographies, may preserve a record of contact long before Columbus. The most famous anomaly in this story is the Pyrie Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed his chart was based on much older sources. On its surface, it depicts the coasts of South America with uncanny precision, at a time when Europeans had barely explored them. Some argue that it even shows the shores of Antarctica, free of ice, suggesting a memory of a world far older than history allows. But what makes the map relevant here is that Pierre Rees himself admitted he drew upon maps captured from Europeans, and among them, he claimed, were ancient charts said to have been handed down from earlier times. Could some of those sources have been Templar in origin, brought from voyages across the Atlantic and preserved in secret archives until fragments resurfaced centuries later? The Templars had motive. By the 14th century, as their enemies closed in, the Order's fleet was one of their greatest assets. At La Rochelle, they had ships ready to vanish into the horizon. If those vessels carried not only men but charts of lands across the sea, then those charts would have been worth more than any treasure. They would represent a new world, beyond the reach of kings and popes, a place of refuge and possibility. Such maps could not be left in France to be seized by Philip IV. They would have been spirited away, to Portugal, to Scotland, or perhaps across the sea itself. Across the Atlantic, the Maya were not map-makers in the European sense. They did not draw coastlines with compass and ruler, but they encoded geography into their codices, into glyphs that recorded trade routes, rivers, and sacred landscapes. Archaeologists now know that the Maya engaged in long-distance commerce, moving jade, obsidian, salt, and cacao across hundreds of miles. Canoes carried goods along the coasts, and Maya seafarers were skilled at navigating by stars, currents, and landmarks. Spanish accounts describe canoes so large they could carry dozens of men and cargo, vessels capable of hugging coastlines for long journeys. Though we have little direct evidence of Maya transoceanic voyages, their seafaring capacity was undeniable. If strangers arrived on their shores, the Maya would have understood their ships, recorded their routes, perhaps even mapped their origins in their own symbolic way. Fragments of this possibility surface in whispers. Some claim that in the lost codices, there were depictions of lands far beyond the horizon, of journeys undertaken by priestly navigators guided by Venus and the sun. Others suggest that Maya stone inscriptions showing foreign visitors may actually encode coordinates, with certain glyphs representing stars and directional alignments. If so, they were more than myth. They were maps disguised in sacred language. The overlap with Templar traditions becomes intriguing when we look at suppressed European charts. Medieval Port-Ollon maps, those strange, star-like diagrams with radiating compass lines, appeared suddenly in Europe around the 13th century with no clear predecessor. They were so accurate in some regions that scholars still debate how they could have been made without advanced surveying or long-range exploration. Where did this cartographic leap come from? Some suggest it was knowledge retrieved from ancient sources, perhaps even carried back by Templars from the East. Others whisper of Atlantic voyages, journeys that never entered the official chronicles but left their mark on secret maps used only by trusted navigators. If the Templars carried such charts, and if they ever made landfall in the Americas, then one can imagine a moment where their knowledge intersected with Maya cosmography. Perhaps the strangers unrolled their parchments, showing coasts and stars. Perhaps the Maya priests, in turn, pointed to their codices, tracing glyphs of celestial movements. Two cartographies, two ways of knowing space and time, meeting for a brief moment in history, only to be erased later by conquest, suppression, and fire. There's also the enigma of the Zeno map, published in the 16th century, but claiming to be based on 14th century voyages. It depicts lands in the North Atlantic with remarkable detail, including Greenland and parts of North America. Scholars dismiss it as a hoax, but what if it is a relic of suppressed voyages, perhaps Templar expeditions that sailed north and west before ever heading south? If some of those ships continued further, reaching as far as the Caribbean or Central America, then their maps may have crossed into the hands of the Maya. Or Conversely, if the Templars retreated to the New World after their fall, they may have absorbed Mayan knowledge into their charts, blending European coastlines with Mesoamerican horizons. We must also consider the silence. Maps are dangerous precisely because they reveal too much. If the Spanish had found a Maya codex describing contact with outsiders before Columbus, it would have been heresy, a direct challenge to the narrative of discovery and divine mandate. If European officials had uncovered Templar charts showing lands across the Atlantic, it would have undermined royal claims to novelty and control. In both cases, suppression would follow. The burning of codices, the locking away of archives, the destruction of heretical maps, all serve the same purpose: to erase alternative histories and preserve a singular, controlled narrative. And yet, fragments survive. A symbol carved in a stone that looks suspiciously like a compass rose. A Maya glyph that appears to show a canoe beside a foreign ship. A European chart that depicts a coastline centuries too early. Each fragment is a whisper of forbidden cartography, of maps that once existed but were never meant to be seen. Together, they suggest that the story of exploration is far older than we are taught, that the lines of contact stretch back not 5 centuries but perhaps 7, 8, or more. If we look closely at the surviving codices, even the Dresden Codex with its astronomical tables may be seen as a kind of map, not of land, but of time and stars, guiding the traveler not across seas but across cycles. To a Templar navigator steeped in mystical traditions, such a codex would have been more valuable than gold. And to a Maya priest, a European portal-on map might have seemed crude, yet fascinating, a different way of seeing the world, flattening sacred space in immeasurable distance. Their exchange would not just have been one of goods, but of worldviews. The forbidden cartographies, then, are not only about coastlines and islands. They are about the clash and fusion of cosmologies. They are about how two civilizations, one Christian and militant, the other cosmic and cyclical, may have briefly shared their visions of the world, encoded in parchment and bark, in ink and glyph. And it is precisely because such contact would upend the story we are told, the story of Columbus, of European primacy, of discovery as conquest, that the maps had to be hidden, suppressed, or destroyed. Yet history has a way of leaving echoes. When we trace the outlines of the Piri-Reis map, when we puzzle over the Zeno chart, when we marvel at the precision of portolans or the astronomical genius of Maya codices, we sense the shadow of a deeper truth, a truth that the official record denies, but the fragments refuse to let us forget. Perhaps one day, a forgotten chest will yield a chart too precise to dismiss, showing a Maya coastline drawn in a Templar hand. Or a codex will surface, mapping stars and seas together, proof of an encounter erased. Until then, we are left with silence, whispers, and the suspicion that somewhere, in forbidden cartographies hidden from us, the real history of the world is still waiting to be revealed. Knowledge at its core is power. But throughout human history, there has always been knowledge deemed too dangerous, too destabilizing, too threatening to the structures of authority. The custodians of that knowledge become targets, and the knowledge itself becomes the object of erasure. This is the story of forbidden wisdom, the kind the Knights Templar carried across continents, and the kind the Maya encoded in their prophecies and sacred books. Both bodies of knowledge, in their own way, were silenced, and yet both still whisper across the centuries. The Templars were not simply warriors in white mantles marked with red crosses. Beneath the martial image, they cultivated a hidden intellectual tradition. In the Holy Land, they encountered mystics, astronomers, scholars, and even remnants of ancient sects that carried knowledge considered heretical in the West. Rumors spread that they had absorbed Kabbalistic teachings from Jewish sages, geometry from Islamic mathematicians, and secret rites from older, pagan cults that still lingered in the deserts. When the order was crushed in 1307, one of the chief accusations against them was heresy, the charge of worshipping forbidden deities, of practicing rituals outside the church's control, of holding mysteries too dangerous to be allowed. Whether these accusations were exaggerated or fabricated by their enemies, they hint at a truth. The Templars were keepers of knowledge that challenged orthodoxy. The Maya, in a parallel way, were guardians of forbidden wisdom within their own context. Their entire civilization revolved around cycles of time, cosmic order, and prophecy. The Popol Vuh, the sacred narrative of creation, described not just the origins of humanity, but the fate of ages to come. Their codices, books written on bark paper, painted with glyphs, contained astronomical tables of breathtaking accuracy, recording eclipses, Venus cycles, and the turning of the heavens with a precision modern science only confirmed centuries later. But these books were not mere scientific instruments. They were spiritual tools, guiding priests in divination, prophecy, and ritual. To the Maya, to know the heavens was to know the destiny of man. And that, too, was dangerous knowledge, for it gave them insight into cycles of rise and fall, of empires destined to collapse. When we imagine a meeting between Templars and Maya sages, we can almost see the exchange. A Templar knight, perhaps more mystic than soldier, unrolls a parchment marked with sacred geometry, lines of proportion that echo the dimensions of Solomon's temple. Across from him, a Maya priest opens a codex, pointing to a series of glyphs that show the movements of Venus. The two do not speak the same language, yet symbols become their bridge. One traces the cross, not only a Christian emblem, but also a cosmic axis. The other points to the quincunx, the Maya symbol of the four directions and the center. Both understand the universe is ordered and the key lies in sacred patterns. But just as the Templar tradition was branded heretical, the Maya's knowledge, too, was condemned. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they recognized in the codices something they feared, a system of wisdom that rivaled their own scriptures, a cosmos not centered on Christ but on celestial cycles. In 1562, Bishop Diego de Landa infamously gathered the Maya books he could find and burned them, declaring them works of the devil. In a single day, centuries of recorded wisdom turned to ash. Only a handful of codices survived, smuggled away, or forgotten. The rest were forbidden knowledge, erased because they challenged the conqueror's narrative of truth. What makes this suppression so haunting is its parallel. The Templars, too, saw their libraries destroyed. Their secret archives, said to contain scrolls recovered from beneath Solomon's temple itself, vanished after their fall. Some say they were burned, others that they were hidden in Scotland, Portugal, or carried aboard the lost fleet. Whatever their fate, the effect was the same. Knowledge deliberately erased. Two civilizations, one in Europe, one in Mesoamerica, both guardians of mysteries, both silenced by fire and decree. But erasure is never complete. Fragments always survive. In the Maya case, we still have the Dresden Codex, with its astronomical precision that continues to astonish. In the Templar tradition, we have the persistent rumors of hidden treasures, of Grail lore, of secret lineages that claim descent from the Order's inner circles. And in both, we see the fingerprints of forbidden knowledge that refuses to die. One of the most compelling areas of overlap is prophecy. The Maya believed in world ages, cycles of creation and destruction. Their calendar did not simply measure time. It revealed when one age would end and another begin. The much misunderstood 2012 prophecy is only one example of how their system foretold endings and transformations. The Templars, too, were tied to prophecy. Some medieval sources claim they possessed apocalyptic visions, that they believed their order would one day return at the end of time, bringing with them hidden truths. The Book of Revelation was central to medieval Christianity, and the Templars, steeped in eschatology, may have carried secret interpretations of it. Imagine, then, if these prophetic traditions were compared. A Maya priest describing the fall of an age, a Templar knight interpreting Revelation's trumpets and seals. Two worldviews, both foretelling collapse and renewal. If such an exchange happened, the knowledge would be dangerous indeed. Dangerous not because it was false, but because it suggested that the church did not hold a monopoly on truth, that cycles of time and destiny were larger than papal authority. That kind of idea could topple empires. The suppression of this wisdom, therefore, was not accidental. It was deliberate. The destruction of codices was not just about erasing idolatry. It was about controlling narratives of time, creation, and destiny. The persecution of the Templars was not just about greed or politics. It was about silencing an order that had grown too independent, too knowledgeable, too mystical. In both cases, forbidden knowledge was seen as a threat to centralized authority, whether the Vatican in Europe or the Spanish crown in the New World. And yet, across the centuries, hints remain. The Maya prophecies, half lost but remembered in oral tradition, still circulate today. The Templar mysteries, though clouded by myth, inspire seekers of hidden truth. Both are fragments of a deeper stream of wisdom, one that seems to resist total suppression. Perhaps it is because knowledge of this kind cannot be fully destroyed. It is cyclical, like the Maya calendar itself. Burn the codices, and echoes survive in memory. Destroy the order, and legends grow in its place. If the Templars met the Maya, the most enduring legacy of that encounter would not be physical artifacts or even maps, but the transmission of forbidden knowledge, glimpses of cosmology, prophecy, and sacred cycles exchanged across the sea. That exchange, if it happened, would have been brief but profound, enough to plant seeds that later generations might only dimly recall. And it would explain why, centuries later, both traditions seem to haunt us. The Templar cross and the Maya calendar will both linger in the collective imagination, symbols of mysteries just out of reach. Forbidden knowledge has a way of resurfacing when the world is ready. Perhaps that is why, in our own time, interest in Templar mysteries and Maya prophecies has surged. Perhaps we are sensing the echoes of a lost encounter, one that spoke of cycles, of endings and beginnings, of a universe larger than any empire. And perhaps the suppression itself is proof of its power. For why else would kings, popes, and conquerors go to such lengths to burn, erase, and silence, if the knowledge were not truly dangerous? In the end, we are left with a paradox. The forbidden knowledge of the Templars and the Maya is both gone and present, erased yet still alive in fragments, myths, and whispers. It reminds us that history is not only what was recorded, but also what was deliberately hidden. And it invites us to listen closely to the faint echoes of voices silenced by fire, yet still speaking through the cracks of time. There comes a point in every forbidden history where speculation and evidence converge into something more, a moment when the lines of possibility form a picture too vivid to ignore. Up to now, we have traced fragments, maps that should not exist, codices half-burned, whispers of fleets that vanished and prophecies silenced. But here, in the shadowy crossroads of Templar legend and Maya cosmology, lies the heart of the mystery. The possibility that these two civilizations did not just exist in parallel, but met, however briefly, on the far side of the ocean. Legends of lost white-cloaked strangers echo through Mesoamerican oral traditions. Spanish chroniclers, despite their bias, recorded Maya stories of visitors who came from the east, across the sea, carrying strange banners and bearing knowledge of stars. The descriptions are vague, wrapped in myth, yet there are details that invite comparison. Some accounts speak of men with long beards, unusual in Mesoamerican imagery. Others describe crosses carried as sacred symbols, crosses that resembled but did not match those of the Spaniards. Could these be distorted memories of an earlier contact, not with conquistadors, but with knights fleeing persecution centuries before Columbus? Consider the timeline. When the Templars were dismantled in 1307, dozens of their ships disappeared from La Rochelle. What became of them remains unsolved. Some scholars suggest they simply joined pirate fleets, others that they sailed to Scotland or Portugal. But a bolder theory suggests they went west, carrying with them not just wealth, but an entire vision of survival. to establish a hidden refuge beyond the reach of kings and popes. If so, the Caribbean and Central America would have been logical destinations, guided by old maps and perhaps rumors inherited from earlier Norse chaos. Wars ravaged the land, religion divided nations and families, and plagues swept through cities. In the post-classic era, centers like Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and coastal trading hubs still flourished. The Maya were skilled sailors, sending massive canoes along trade routes as far as Honduras and Mexico's Yucatán. If a foreign ship appeared on their horizon, they would not have been ignorant villagers gazing in shock. They would have understood seafaring, trade, and diplomacy. A meeting could have occurred not as a clash, but as an exchange, cautious at first, perhaps even sacred in its weight. One of the most compelling threads comes from the mysterious carvings at certain Maya sites that appear to show foreign visitors. At Tulum, a coastal fortress city, there are depictions of figures in strange attire, carrying objects that do not seem native. Some researchers dismiss them as mere stylizations, but others see hints of outsiders. Robes, crosses, even ships etched into stone. Could these be faint records of Templar encounters, encoded in the only way the Maya could preserve such memory once the codices were burned? European sources, too, hold tantalizing hints. A Portuguese tradition speaks of sailors reaching a land of great temples long before Columbus, a land where they saw pyramids rising above jungles. Another story, recorded in the Scottish Isles, tells of Templar ships that vanished to a world where the sun was hotter and the gods strange. These are fragmentary, unreliable, but they echo each other in a way too coincidental to dismiss. If multiple traditions across centuries recall voyages westward and lands of temples, we are left to wonder whether myth is only myth. Let us imagine the encounter itself, a cinematic vision that has haunted seekers of lost history for generations. A Templar galley, battered by storms, finally makes landfall on a tropical shore. Exhausted knights in faded mantles step onto white sand, clutching banners with a red cross. From the jungle, Maya priests approach, resplendent in feathered headdresses, their faces painted with symbols of gods. At first, fear hangs in the air, but then recognition. Both sides carry sacred symbols of the cross, both read the heavens as a guide. The knights show their parchment maps. The Maya open their bark paper codices. And for one night, beneath a canopy of stars, two worlds exchange secrets across firelight. Was this real history, or is it merely imagination? Skeptics say there is no hard proof. No armor has been dug from Maya soil. No codex clearly depicting a Templar ship has survived. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The burning of Maya books, the silencing of Templar archives, both were deliberate acts of erasure. If proof ever existed, it may have been destroyed precisely because it was too disruptive. After all, what would it mean if Europe's so-called discovery of the New World was not discovery at all, but rediscovery, and if contact had already been made centuries earlier by an outlawed order? It would undermine the entire narrative of empire. The Maya themselves may have encoded the memory in prophecy. Some scholars note that Maya texts describe cycles when foreigners would return, bringing upheaval. While these passages are usually interpreted as foresight of Spanish conquest, what if they also referenced earlier encounters? The return of strangers may not have been a first arrival in 1519, but the reappearance of a presence already known in distant memory. Such layering of prophecy, where past and future blur, is consistent with Maya cyclical time. To them, history repeats, encounters echo across ages. Another haunting possibility is that fragments of Templar esoteric tradition were absorbed into Maya cosmology, or vice versa. Certain cross-like glyphs in Maya inscriptions, once thought to be purely symbolic, resemble European designs too closely for some researchers to dismiss. Likewise, Templar lore of a great refuge across the sea, a land of temples where wisdom survived, may have been inspired by actual contact mythologized over generations until fact became legend? If so, then both traditions secretly preserved the memory of their meeting, each in its own way. The climactic question, then, is not simply whether the Templars met the Maya, but why the memory of such a meeting was so carefully erased. History is written by the victors, and both the Church and the Crown had much to lose if it were revealed that outcasts, heretics, had reached the New World before Columbus. For the Maya, too, the knowledge was dangerous. Their priests may have recorded the meeting, but the Spanish burned their books to enforce the lie of conquest. In the end, both sides lost the record, and we are left with fragments scattered across time. And yet, when we piece those fragments together, the missing fleet of La Rochelle, the foreign bearded visitors in Maya stories, the anomalous maps, the strange carvings, we begin to see a picture. It may never be provable in the strict academic sense, but it is compelling in the way all great mysteries are. It resonates. It explains gaps, it connects anomalies, it gives shape to what mainstream history cannot. And it brings us, at last, to the forbidden heart of the story. The idea that two great civilizations, separated by an ocean, may have touched across time in a moment of shared wonder, only to have their voices silenced by fire and power. This is the climax, because it is the point of no return. Once you allow yourself to consider the possibility, you cannot easily dismiss it. The Templars and the Maya, knights and priests, parchments and codices, crosses and calendars, standing together on some forgotten shore. A moment that, if it truly happened, would change the way we understand both civilizations. And perhaps, deep down, that is why the story persists. Because some part of us knows that history is not as simple as the textbooks say. That behind the silence of burned books and lost fleets lies a truth too powerful to stay buried forever. History is never just about the past. Every story we uncover, every fragment we interpret, is also a mirror held up to the present. The mystery of the Knights Templar and the Maya is no different. Whether one believes in the literal voyage across the Atlantic, or views it as a symbolic parable of connection, the narrative forces us to confront larger questions. What do we choose to remember? What do we choose to forget? And who decides which truths are preserved, and which are consigned to the flames? In one sense, the Templar Maya story is about exploration. It is about the human drive to cross boundaries, to seek what lies beyond the horizon, to risk everything in pursuit of knowledge or survival. That same impulse animates us today. We may not sail wooden ships into uncharted oceans, but we launch satellites into space. We dive into the code of artificial intelligence. We dig beneath ruins for lost cities. Each age has its horizon. For the Templars, it was the ocean. For the Maya, it was the cycles of time and stars. For us, it is the unknown future. To see their story is to recognize our own. A restless species, forever searching, never content to remain within the boundaries of what is already known. Yet in another sense, the story is about suppression. Both the Templars and the Maya were crushed by powers greater than themselves. One was condemned by a king and a pope, accused of heresy and obliterated from the record. The other was conquered by empire and Christianity, its libraries burned, its traditions rewritten. Their knowledge was deemed dangerous, their existence inconvenient to the narrative of the victors. What survived was fragmentary, distorted, hidden. And this raises a haunting truth. Perhaps the greatest secret of history is not what happened, but what has been erased. Here, the Templar-Maya encounter becomes more than a speculation. It becomes a symbol of all the hidden histories that lie beneath the surface of our textbooks. For every pyramid that still stands, how many were buried or destroyed? For every manuscript preserved in an archive, how many were burned in silence? For every name remembered in chronicles, how many voices were deliberately muted? When we tell the story of the Templars and the Maya, we are really telling the story of all those who lived in the margins, all those whose truths were never meant to survive. At the same time, this story reveals something profound about human resilience. Despite the fires of suppression, fragments endured. A glyph carved in stone, a symbol hidden in architecture, a rumor whispered across generations. Knowledge does not die easily. It may be silenced for centuries, but it waits for rediscovery. Just as seeds can lie dormant in the earth for thousands of years before sprouting, so too can forbidden histories wait in the shadows until the right conditions allow them to emerge. The Templars' legacy survived in esoteric traditions, in Freemasonry, in the Grail myths. The Maya's wisdom survived in oral traditions, in calendars, in codices hidden from destruction. Together, they remind us that even when powers conspire to erase, human memory finds ways to resist. And what of us today? We live in an age of fragments, an age when hidden knowledge is surfacing again. Archaeology is uncovering lost cities beneath the jungles of Guatemala, revealing networks more vast than historians ever imagined. Digital archives are bringing together manuscripts scattered across continents. Indigenous voices are reclaiming traditions once silenced. The internet itself has become a modern codex, fragile, chaotic, but capable of preserving what authorities once destroyed. We are witnessing a reversal of suppression. What was once forbidden is resurfacing. And yet this too poses questions. Are we ready for what we might find? If forbidden histories destabilize the narratives we have built our civilizations upon, what new myths will we need to construct? The Templar Maya mystery, then, is not just about proving whether a voyage happened. It is about reimagining what history itself is. Perhaps history is not a linear record of events, but a tapestry of connections, some visible, others hidden. Perhaps civilizations have always touched across oceans and deserts, long before official timelines admit. Perhaps the boundaries we assume, Old World and New, Europe and America, conqueror and conquered, were always more porous than we think. If the Templars and the Maya met, it was not an anomaly. It was an expression of a deeper truth. The human cultures are destined to seek each other, destined to exchange, destined to leave behind mysteries that later generations will puzzle over. There's also a personal dimension. To engage with this story is to be reminded that each of us is also the inheritor of silenced histories. Our families, our communities, our nations, all carry memories that have been censored, rewritten, or forgotten. To recover them is not only an act of scholarship, but of identity. Just as the Mayas seek to reclaim their traditions and the Templars live on in myth, we too must ask, what has been erased from our own lineages, and how can we bring it back into light? And then there is the cosmic dimension. Both the Templars and the Maya were societies obsessed with the sacred. The Templars sought the Holy Grail, the Ark, the mysteries of Christ's temple. The Maya charted the heavens, calculated the ages, built temples aligned with stars. If they truly encountered one another, it was not just a meeting of ships and swords, but of cosmologies. Each would have seen in the other a reflection of their own quest for meaning. In our age of materialism, this reminder is powerful. It tells us that the pursuit of the sacred is not a relic of the past, but a deep human need that transcends time. Perhaps the most important lesson is that knowledge is not only technical, but spiritual. To lose forbidden histories is not only to lose facts. It is to lose ways of seeing the world, ways that may be crucial for our future. Finally, the Templar Maya mystery asks us to look inward. Why do we find this story so captivating? Why does it haunt us with possibility? Perhaps because it speaks to our longing for a hidden truth behind appearances, for a deeper reality than the one offered by official records. In a world where information is everywhere, yet often hollow, we crave mysteries that challenge us to look harder, to dig deeper, to question the stories we are told. The forbidden history of the Templars and the Maya is not just about them. It is about us. It is about our refusal to accept silence, our hunger for what lies beyond the horizon, our sense that the truth, however suppressed, is always waiting to return. And so, Section 15 does not resolve the story with certainty. Instead, it leaves us with an invitation to keep searching, an invitation to recognize that history is alive, that the past is not buried, but breathing beneath the surface, waiting for us to uncover it. Whether the Templars truly stood in the jungles of Mesoamerica may never be proven beyond doubt, but the possibility itself transforms us. It challenges us to see the world differently, not as divided continents, but as a web of connections, not as a closed book, but as a living mystery. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all, not proof, but wonder. The story of the Templars and the Maya is, in the end, a riddle without a final answer. We began with the vanishing of a fleet, ships slipping into the Atlantic mist from La Rochelle in 1307, never to be seen again. We followed the whispers of that fleet across centuries. Rumors of voyages, fragments of maps, strange symbols carved in stone, forbidden codices, and the haunting silence of archives where truth may be hidden. And we imagined, for just a moment, what it would mean if the exiled knights and the astronomer priests of Mesoamerica had stood face to face, recognizing in one another the same devotion to mystery, to sacred geometry, to the eternal search for the divine. Whether that meeting happened in flesh and blood may remain uncertain. The jungles hold no signed treaties, no carved record of ships with red crosses arriving on foreign shores. And yet, the absence of proof is not the same as proof of absence. The possibility lingers, like a ghost walking the corridors of history. Every fragment, every anomaly, every suppressed record whispers that there is more to this story than we have been told. Perhaps that is the point. The power of forbidden history does not lie in giving us a neat, closed narrative. It lies in reminding us that history itself is a living mystery, one shaped as much by what is hidden as by what is revealed. The burning of Maya codices was not just an act of destruction. It was an attempt to control reality, to erase inconvenient truths. The suppression of the Templars was not just the downfall of a military order. It was the silencing of a knowledge system that challenged power. And yet, fragments survived. They always do. In myths, in legends, in half-burned manuscripts and half-forgotten maps, the echoes remain. And those echoes call to us. Why else do we return again and again to the Templars, to Atlantis, to the Maya calendar, to forbidden maps? Why else do we feel compelled to search for lost cities beneath jungles or to question official timelines? It is because, deep down, we sense that the story we are told is incomplete, that the neat lines of mainstream history are like a map missing its most important coasts. That truth is not a fixed monument, but a labyrinth, and some of its passages remain hidden. The meeting of the Templars and the Maya is one of those hidden passages. Whether it happened literally or symbolically, it represents a crossing of worlds, old and new, east and west, Christian and indigenous, warrior and priest, science and myth. To imagine them together is to imagine a kind of synthesis, a recognition that humanity's greatest treasures are not its empires or conquests, but its knowledge, its myths, its vision of the sacred. And maybe that is the secret that has been feared all along. For what happens when civilizations discover they are not as separate as they seem? What happens when we realize that knowledge, long before the internet or the printing press, flowed across oceans, across languages, across worlds? What happens when we recognize that the boundaries we cling to of nation, of culture, of era, have always been porous? It would destabilize the story of supremacy, of first contact, of discovery. It would show us that history is not a ladder of progress, but a web, and that web has always been more interconnected than the victors wanted us to believe. This is why such stories are forbidden, not because they are fanciful, but because they are dangerous. They remind us that power has always depended on controlling memory, that to erase a codex is to erase a worldview, that to silence a brotherhood is to silence an alternative path, that to dictate the past is to dictate the present. And yet, no matter how hard the flames burn, no matter how deep the silence, fragments endure, waiting for us, centuries later, to notice them. Standing here, centuries removed from the fall of the Templars and the burning of the Maya libraries, we are the inheritors of those fragments. We live in an age when forbidden histories resurface, when satellites pierce jungles to reveal lost cities, when archives digitize manuscripts once locked away, when oral traditions long suppressed are spoken aloud once more. We live in an age of rediscovery. But with that rediscovery comes responsibility. What will we do with it? Will we reduce it to entertainment, another myth among myths? Or will we allow it to transform how we see ourselves, as participants in a story much older, stranger, and deeper than the one written in textbooks? The Templars and the Maya teach us that history is not only about conquest and collapse, but about resilience and connection. They remind us that knowledge is sacred, that wisdom is fragile, and that truth, though suppressed, always finds its way back. Their story, whether literal or symbolic, is a mirror. It shows us the price of forgetting and the power of remembering. So as the final echoes of this journey fade, we are left not with answers, but with questions. What if the lost Templar fleet did reach the shores of the New World? What if their secrets live still in fragments of codices, in unexplained symbols, in maps locked away in forbidden vaults? What if our entire understanding of human history is but the visible tip of a submerged reality, a reality of voyages, encounters, and knowledge exchanges erased from record? These questions may never be fully resolved, but perhaps they're not meant to be. Perhaps the greatest gift of forbidden history is not certainty, but wonder. To wonder is to keep searching. To wonder is to resist silence. To wonder is to remain alive to mystery, to possibility, to the idea that the past is not dead, but alive, breathing beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And so the story closes not with a conclusion, but with an invitation. Look again at the maps. Listen again to the myths. Question again the archives. Seek out the fragments. Because somewhere, scattered across the world, the echoes of that forbidden meeting still linger. And perhaps, in uncovering them, we're not only rediscovering the Templars or the Maya, we are rediscovering ourselves. The fleet vanished. The codices burned. The archives locked their doors. But memory is patient. And history, no matter how forbidden, always finds a way to return.